Good afternoon and welcome, everyone. I would like to call the committee of the whole meeting for April 12th, 2021 to order. Are there any additions to the agenda? Seeing none, we'll move into committee reports. Councillor Blacks. Committee reports.
Which dates is this for?
Whatever work you've done, or
Just for April?
yeah.
Just for April. Okay, cool. Yeah. So I've recently been a part of the Peace Cairn planning committee. We're trying to plan a celebration ceremony for October for Alberta Culture Days.
Mhm.
So we've been meeting every second Wednesday, and the planning's going really, really well so far. It looks like we're going to have a really fun time in October if COVID allows us to. And yeah, other than that, CEC committee has been going good. I wasn't able to attend the last meeting, but yeah, we're coming up with some really good stuff for Team Up to Clean Up. That's going to be happening in May. And that way we can clean up our community and make it look bright and shiny.
Thank you. Councillor Nielsen.
Thank you. The only committee meeting that I had was WALA, which is Wetaskiwin Area Lodge Authority. Alan and I sit on that committee. And our last meeting is doing our audited financial report. And WALA by itself looks after, it's part of the Bethany group, which looks after basically a lot of seniors housing and low-cost housing options for people all over central Alberta. But as it relates to us, it deals with Peace Hills Lodge and West Pine Lodge out in Winfield. And so there is a taxation segment that goes out to our community to help offset the costs of the seniors complex, particularly in Wetaskiwin at Peace Hills. The other and most pressing piece of information is that the West Pine Lodge is actually owned by the provincial government, and really tiny rooms. It's not necessarily been kept up to date. So a lot of work has been planned for that, but they never seem to get any of the resources from the provincial government to do anything with it. And they're also finding, because of that, the seniors residents who are moving off farm properties or out of their residences don't tend to want to go to Peace Hills Lodge, West Pine Lodge in Winfield. So we have a huge vacancy rate out there, which creates all sorts of problems in terms of paying the bills. So spent a lot of time in the last meeting working on a survey for the residents in that area to determine whether they're going to access that lodge or not, and then make some determination about how to move forward from there. So that's what's on the table with WALA.
Thank you. Councillor Billingston.
Library board. We're currently working. We finished our first meeting working on the agreement between the city and the library board. We're meeting again Tuesday next week to kind of go through a draft agreement. Hopefully have something back into the city's hands by the end of the month. And if everything is a-okay, hopefully by the end of June, the agreement to be in place. That's sort of the timetable that we're hoping to have. Obviously, Gabby had talked about the CEC with the Team Up to Clean Up, which will be maybe, I think, 14th, 15th, and 16th or something like that. So that's me.
Thank you. Mayor Gamble.
We're planning on doing our strategic planning hopefully in the next week or two. Board members are going to start looking at doing some competencies through the learning modules of FCS SAA. We had a presentation again from the Open Door on their work. They're changing a little bit of the accessibility inside the building and increasing security, working on hours and restrictions to who's going to be making entry. They're going to do a little better job of tracking their Meals on Wheels policies regarding to the executive director, signing with board or staff. And part of what we're going to be talking about at our strategic planning is whether or not we can somehow get transportation into the mix of what FCSS can offer, if we can find it under our mandate. And that would be going back to trying to get on-demand busing or a scheduled route in the city again. Myself and Cindy Plant had met with Minister Wilson a few weeks ago, and he loved the idea, so it'll be something that we'll try to explore. Otherwise, it's just grant funding, applications, and working with our community. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Hilger.
Thank you. Other than I missed the Walleye meeting, I had a family member in the hospital, so I spent most of the day in the hospital all that week. The only other thing we had was the Memorial Fund meeting, which I'm going to let Councillor Branco and inform us what happened on that meeting, and that's about it. Thank you.
Councillor Bronco.
Thank you. Our Memorial Fund, we finally got to see the financial statement on, and 2019 financial statement, and I believe we signed off on everything. So I think that was our last meeting, I believe. So everything's good. Other than that, my other committee of the camera was Wetaskiwin. We haven't had anything yet arranged, so hoping to hear from them soon. That's it.
Okay, thank you. I myself was just at the Memorial Fund meeting as well, where we got the paperwork all wrapped up, and Candace seemed pretty happy that it was done. And other than that, we've been having some Zoom meetings with the Inclusiveness and Diversity Committee, which have been going very, very well. Being a new committee, we're just starting to get our feet wet as to how we can operate and what we're going to do, but we've had some really good conversation, and what I really enjoy is the feedback I'm getting from the community. Very, very positive attitudes toward this, and especially with some of my friends that I deal with daily from Maskwacis. They're very impressed that the city is taking this step to just try to make Wetaskiwin more inclusive. That's about it. So we'll move on to item 3A, grants update 2021. I believe we have Jody.
Good afternoon, Council. So in front of you, you have a grants update up until April 2021. So again, in the tables, you'll find all of the different grants. I'll only be speaking to the ones that actually have updates. Some of them I've spoke to previously. So for the approved 2021 grants, the first one you see there from the grantor AUMA, I spoke to last time. The second one there, Housing and Homeless Supports from the Ministry of Community and Social Services. So this grant was originally approved for $439,000. In discussion with the province, Jamie and I met with them, and just on the underutilization of the program, the province has requested that we actually reduce the budget in our meeting. They had stated it would be $145,000, but in the grant agreement, it's actually $168,891 that we'll be receiving instead of the $439,000. Now, should the utilization of the ACES site increase, we can renegotiate this funding. They just didn't want to earmark us with a ton of funding, leaving little left for other organizations that may be able to utilize it as well. So the second one, the social services support for COVID-19 top-up funding. So in summer 2020, FCSS applied for $101,750 from FCSS-AA under the Social Services Support for COVID-19 program. FCSS was approved for $75,500. On February 24th, 2021, FCSS-AA announced an additional $37,750 in funding for a total amount of $113,250 for that grant. So the next one, the Good Food Access Fund Round 7. On August 19th, 2020, FCSS applied for the Good Food Access Fund Round 6 BIPOC funding and was unapproved. This result was expected given that FCSS had already been approved for $20,000 in grocery gift cards and $80,000 in food security related funding. On February 6th, 2021, the Good Food Access Fund actually reconsidered our application and approved us for the original $50,000 as part of their Round 7 funding. As this funding focuses on BIPOC initiative, food hampers and gift cards are being dispersed to the 4 nations of Musqueam. So for unapproved grant, this one I believe, no, I didn't speak to this one last time, supporting psychological health and first responders grant. So we had submitted for PTSI training for $16,900. We heard through the grapevine that this funding was really competitive and unfortunately we weren't approved. For outstanding grants 2020, an application is currently underway or under review for the Municipal Asset Management Program. So we submitted this one in September 2020 and it's for $34,400 that will support data collection of city assets. The community grant for Tree Canada, I actually just found out 2 weeks ago we were unapproved for this one. It was submitted for the Fruit Forest for Montgomery Park. The intermunicipal collaboration for the Alberta Community Partnership was submitted for $200,000. So this grant is in collaboration with the County of Wetaskiwin and focuses on regional service delivery, primarily on storm water systems, but may also include other issues such as road maintenance, mutual fire aid, mutual disaster aid, transit, and libraries. The tree planting grant for Fortis for $2,500. This one is still outstanding. And this would be for trees planted along Highway 13 at the City of Wetaskiwin entrance sign. The STIP Airport paving through Alberta Transportation. So this was for the community airport stream of the Strategic Transportation Infrastructure Program offered through Alberta Transportation, and it's a $1.6 million grant for the paving of the runway, apron 1 and taxi B overlays. The total project cost is the $2.1 million with STIP covering about 75% of it. And then for outstanding grants for 2021, an application was submitted to Canada Summer Jobs for $170,000 for 25 summer student position. Potential grant is for up to 75% of minimum wage coverage. I anticipate hearing back on this one any day now as the positions would be starting in May. And then an application was submitted by FCSS for the Civil Society Fund for $60,500 for the development of a virtual hub that centralizes and hosts event programming, information for community groups in the region. I actually just found out last week that we were unsuccessful for this application. And that is it for the grants update.
Thank you, Jody. Any questions? Thanks again, Jody. Seeing
Thank
none, we'll move on to item 3B, 2021 Summary Land Use Bylaw Amendments. And I believe we have Andrew.
Hey,
Hello,
thank
Andrew.
you, Mr. Chair.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Great. Looks like it's summer again after it was winter yesterday, after it was summer. So
That's right.
we're doing great. Nice. So now that the nice weather is starting to roll in, hopefully permanently this time, it's getting to be summer construction season. And so this item that we as the development team are bringing to Committee of the Whole right now is because over the last year, as we have really kind of refreshed the team, there's a lot of new members in the last year. Actually, all of us are new, myself and the 2 development officers. And so as we have been issuing permits and reviewing the bylaw, there have been quite a few items within the bylaw that we've identified are actually fairly considerable issues with the bylaw. And so we've come up with a fairly long list of things that we want to address. And so our goal is to have these things basically fixed up by this construction season so that hopefully this season can go smoothly. We can issue permits as smoothly as possible, really with the goal of being transparent to the public, reducing red tape, because these issues do cause extraneous staff time and potential issues with appeal risk and that kind of thing. And so the plan really is, actually, sorry, I'll give you more of the high level. So at this point, our land use bylaw is, the bylaw number is from 2013, but that 2013 number was given back in 2013 when it was just kind of a similar update to this, where it was really just several items that they updated from the 2009 bylaw. They decided to give it a new bylaw number, which means that essentially this bylaw is from 2009, which is 12 years old now, and itself is quite outdated and is in desperate need really of modernization and reorganizing, and many of the concepts really do need to be updated to be brought in line with current development trends. And so the big picture really is for that to happen ideally next year. So this year, we've got the municipal development plan update project, which is going to start very soon. Now that we've got this set of amendments done, we're going to start with the MDP. So that is essentially setting the higher level view of what development looks like in the city as a whole. And so once we've done that this year, we'll be ready next year to start to zoom in and look at the actual regulations about how we can make that development vision work on the ground. So that's the high level plan. And so really these amendments that I have brought before you today are essentially to go forward this year with the bylaw we have to make it function for the next year. And then next year we'll do a solid update and refresh. So the reason that I wanted to bring this list to Committee of the Whole right now is because I just want to make sure that of all of the amendments we have, we end up with a quick short list that we can just bring to council, basically as kind of a wholesale update bylaw that we can pass basically, quickly with first reading, public hearing, second, third reading. And so my my goal for you today is, as I go through these, that council would let me know if any of these things in council's opinion needs more consultation, or could be more of a political issue or anything like that. So then I will remove it from this list so we can deal with it separately and we can get the actual critical pieces fixed. So this is just, I'm bringing it to you because you as council are the ones representing the people, and so you know whether these are going to be issues or not. So I think I'm going to go through them one by one quickly though, and I'll try and keep it exciting. I know not everyone's as excited about land use regulations as me, but I'll try and keep you on your toes. So actually, Karen, I wonder, can I share my screen? And I will go through this document and I'll just make notes if necessary. Sorry, it looks like, there we go. Share screen, great. So can you all see this?
Yep.
Yep.
Great, okay, sounds good. So I'm not sure if you've all had a chance to really look at this. I know at first glance, it looks a little heavy, but I'll try and take you through at least the really critical parts. So jumping right into it. So first of all, one of the biggest sections that we've had issues with is in the definitions. And this is where a lot of these, actually, I mentioned that the bylaw really is from 2009, but even then, quite a few of the regulations and concepts were just carried forward from the 1988 bylaw. And so I think that's how we've ended up with quite a few definitions that are just hanging, as in they're not used anywhere in the land use bylaw itself, but they're listed in the definitions, which, you know, really bloats the bylaw, makes it difficult for people to understand what's going on. People don't want to look at the land use bylaw. So we have identified some ways we can clean that up. So I have the definitions mostly in order, except for these first ones, because these ones are under the topic of land use types. And so we've got townhome is defined and row housing is defined, but those definitions are essentially the same. So the only difference there is that townhomes are containing a row of more than 2 dwellings. Row housing is containing rows of 3 dwellings. Other than that, the definitions are the same, which means one of them is fairly redundant. And so the recommendation there is just to get rid of the row housing definition, put it under townhome. That captures the actual use type. And then it will also capture triplex. So this is where triplex is actually used, and it's found in some of the land uses or the zones, but it's not defined anywhere. So this is kind of what we're dealing with. So the issue there is if we get an application for a triplex, we as administration have to change the definition. It could be a potential legal issue if someone decides to be really picky about it and take it to appeal and that kind of thing. So really, we just want to clean it up, make it really easy, and eliminate the number of unnecessary definitions. So anyways, I guess I'm actually wondering what is the best way to go forward with this. I wonder, can we just go through each one and maybe I'll say, council, please speak up if you have an issue with this. And if nobody speaks up, I'm going to take it and put it into an amending bylaw and we'll bring it back to council next. So does anyone have questions or issues with this townhome row housing triplex amendment?
Doesn't look like it, Andrew.
Hearing none. Great. Next one, fourplex. Similar issue. Row housing stacked basically captures the entire use. So it's really an unnecessary definition. And in fact, it's not used anywhere in the bylaw. So we don't need it. Any issues or questions?
Councilor Bronco.
Thank you. Andrew, when we
Yep.
do these townhouses, is there a sufficient or fourplex? Is there sufficient parking lot? Is there a limit on how many stalls these people have to have?
There is, yeah. And so the definition aspect won't affect the parking regulations. Those are a separate aspect. And so that's a good point though. So as we delete the row housing definition, if there are parking regulations for row housing, we'll just apply them to the townhome use.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Andrew.
Sounds good. Next one, adult entertainment facility. I think this is one that was brought over from a very old version of the bylaw. And essentially, we've just cleaned it up. It doesn't need to be that long, and really made it a little broader in a good way. Having specific words listed in things could be an issue legally, just in the sense that if we only list these, what if they have a use that is similar but uses a different word? Then what do we do with it? So anyways, we just decided that it would be best to take the wording straight from the AGLC liquor license handbook. And so the wording they use is adult entertainment facility is just anything that's sexually explicit or nude entertainment that's restricted to those 18 years of age or older. So we thought, let's apply that to ours as well. Any questions or issues?
You can map where it's permitted.
Yeah, exactly.
Go ahead, Andy.
Great. So I'll just breeze quickly over these ones, but there are quite a few that aren't used in the bylaw at all, but they show up in the definitions list, so they just don't need to be there. Blank wall is one of them. Canopy really is just an incorrect use of the word, and this is used in the sign section. So recommendation is to delete it from here because it does show up in the sign section. It doesn't need to be here. Conventional construction also is not used at all. Conversion, recommendation is to delete this because the definition itself here is actually not how the word is used in the bylaw. So the conversion obviously is relating to converting of land use, which really is actually is a change of use. And so we have a permit for that. That's not what the definitions are, or that's not how it's used in the bylaw. There is a reference to converting a camper and also reference to condominium conversion. So due to that confusion, we're recommending it just be deleted. And then, so for example, if there was a condo conversion, that those definitions are captured under the Condominium Act, so they don't need to be in our land use bylaw. Development authority, this one is just to bring the reference from bylaw 1352-96 into the land use bylaw. This is listed, I guess actually I'll bring it up later because it's listed in the administration section. Double fronting site, the only change here is just that in the bylaw itself, the term is double fronting lot. So double fronting site isn't found at all in the land use bylaw. So the only change is just change it to lot instead of site. Drive-in service. This term is not used in the land use bylaw. There is drive-in food service, which is essentially a duplication. So let's delete this one and just go with that one. This is the term drive-in food service is found in the actual use sections. Duplex housing, similar to the housing or to the residence types that we talked about before. This one actually is an issue because the current definition doesn't include basements. So it includes entirely above finished grade. And of course, duplexes certainly can have basements. That's a perfectly acceptable type of residence, but our definitions actually don't allow for that, which is a bit of an issue. So our recommendation is that we just change the wording to simplify it. Eating and drinking establishments is not used in the land use bylaw at all. Any uses that would fall under that definition would be under restaurant and that kind of thing. So we have definitions to capture that type of use already. Enclosed front porch, also not used anywhere in the land use bylaw. And again, this is captured by other definitions. So really this type of use would be captured under the addition definition. Fixed signs, this is found in section 7.6, which is signs. So the sign section has sign specific definitions. It seems like a few of them have bled into the regular definitions section, which means they're redundant, don't need to be there. Front yard, we're just changing the definition here because this term, the existing definition doesn't do a great job of actually explaining what the front yard is in terms of how our regulations apply. So our regulations apply to the setback, which is from the front property line to the front of the building. And so the front yard is basically that area. So this wording captures that. The existing wording is just complicated and actually doesn't quite capture the intent of what the front yard is really for. Gaming, this one is great because it has nothing to do with land use at all. So that's awesome. So we're gonna delete it. Garage suite. So garage suite, we are just recommending that we change the the definition a little bit, because most of the definition here actually consists of regulations. And so that's another common theme that we've seen in a few of these definitions. For example, a garage suite has cooking, food preparation, sleeping, bathing facilities. A garage suite has an entrance separate from the entrance to the rear detached garage. So the problem is that when this is in the definition, it's obvious that this is intended to be a regulation saying that when you do develop a garage suite, you need to have a separate entrance separate from the actual garage. But when we have this in the definition, this means that really it would be interpreted as if there is no separate entrance, then it's not a garage suite. And so that's fair enough, but it gets complicated when we're trying to actually issue a permit for it. So the proposal here is just to simplify the use, and then we've moved all of the regulatory clauses into section 8.52. So the regulations will still apply, they'll just be interpreted correctly.
Councillor Nielsen.
No, I'm okay. I'm
You're
good,
good?
thank you.
Nope,
Yep.
nope, we're okay, Andrew.
Okay, thank you. General industrial use. So again, these are regulations, same issue that I mentioned previously. So our proposal here is to remove all of the regulatory, like land use regulation aspects, and we're going to put them in the actual regulations. Alternatively, sorry, I threw an alternative out there. We could just delete this entirely. For example, floor area devoted to such activities shall not exceed 33% of the building. So I think I will throw it to council and say, my recommendation would be, let's add these to the regulation section. And if council so wishes, we can just delete them entirely. If anyone so wishes, speak now. How about?
Anyone? Go ahead.
Great. Ground sign, another sign definition that is in this, it's, oh, actually, sorry, this one's not used at all. So we'll delete it. Height. So the current wording leaves the measurement of steep slope angle roofs unclear. There are several definitions of building height that are common in other municipalities. Often municipalities will define it as basically the halfway point between the peak and the eaves, essentially for any sloped roof. But our current definition only considers flat roofed buildings, which is not very helpful when you have roofs steeper than that. So the proposal is here, we'll just keep it simple and have height be defined as the vertical distance between the grade and the highest point of the roof. High sign, also not used in the bylaw. Home address sign, this is defined under the sign section, so we can delete it here. Livestock, this is not used in the land use bylaw. Same with livestock operation. Loading space, just adding the word unobstructed just to indicate the intent of a loading space and differentiating it from a parking space. Major home-based business. So again, there are quite a few regulatory clauses in this definition, and so they are already addressed actually in 8.7.3, so they don't need to be in the definition. Just improves readability and makes interpretation a lot easier. minor home-based business. So this one actually, we're removing the clause allowing multiple businesses so that there really should only be one minor home-based business per residence. And then similar, removing the regulatory clauses.
Councilor Bronco?
Thank you. That was going to ask you, Andrew, you said major home base or minor.
Yeah.
Either home base or no home base. Kind of odd because it's still a base, so I like to see the minor home base totally deleted. Because you either have a business or you don't.
I see. Sorry, I was a little bit quiet. Can you repeat your statement?
Well, you have a major home business or a minor home business. You either have a home business or you don't.
Oh, I see.
A
Yeah.
minor or major, is the business license the same?
Yeah, the difference. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
What is the difference? You either have a home base or you don't. A business like hairdresser or somebody doing accounting, it's still a business.
Yeah, the difference is the number of trips that it would generate. So in the higher density residential areas, there is potential for more businesses or for more trips per day. So minor home-based business generates one business associated visit per day. And then a major home-based business, yeah, probably a hairdresser, that kind of thing. If it generates more than one business associated visit per day, then it's a major. And so there are certain land uses or certain districts where you're allowed to have those businesses with more visits. And in some residential districts, we only allow the minor.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Councilor Nielsen?
My question, Andrew, is along the same lines, and that is, when it says does not include general retail sales, can you walk me through that general retail sales? So I guess what I'm thinking is we have businesses that are selling jewelry or cosmetics or clothing. Would that be considered general retail sales?
That is a great question. Let's see if that is defined. So you have hit on exactly the type of issue that we encounter every day as we're trying to interpret this bylaw and finding that a lot of the terms are inconsistent. So it looks like general retail sales. This is a great question. What does that mean? So it looks like I would consider it to be the retail sale of anything listed under the general retail store definition, which is groceries, beverages, household goods. But you're right that we probably do have some home-based businesses that probably do look similar to this list. So you're right. That's a great question.
And again, going on to minor home-based businesses, I guess I'm wondering, what kinds of businesses can operate with only one customer per day? I mean, I can understand, like my accountant, she probably only sees one person per day. But if I'm running an automotives or a motorcycle repair shop out of the back of my garage, I got to believe I need more than one person per, like, and how is this? How is this managed and
enforced?
Supervised? I don't know what the right term.
Well, that is a great point, is that it is difficult for us to enforce this. We just don't have the staff to be paying attention every day to every minor home-based business. And so basically this is our point of regulation, and for the most part, we use it as an education tool so that we essentially, when someone does want to start a business, this is our point where we let them know that the intent is that you can have only one business or only one visit per day. But you're right, we don't have the resources to be monitoring this. We don't have that many issues. Sometimes we do get complaints, and we will enlist the help of the bylaw team to go out and help us. enforce that where we can, but you're right. We don't have the resources to enforce it. But does that mean we shouldn't put the regulation in place? Because having it listed here, I think does help with on the ground as they operate. So
So what I hear you saying is that for the most part, these two classifications almost operate on the honor system.
yeah,
Because
for the
people-
most part, they
people
do.
come in and identify as either a major or minor, or we may have home-based businesses that don't register at all.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you.
So with that little bit of discussion, maybe I'll just ask specifically, is this proposed amendment, is council comfortable with this, or is this something that we should take out of this group of amendments and deal with, you know, at a separate time?
Councillor Billingsley.
I'm okay with having major and minor in there and with the amendment.
Yeah, I am as well. Everybody else?
It's not perfect, but I don't know
Right.
how else. Yeah, exactly. It
Yeah.
would be complaint driven.
Looks like we're good with it, Andrew.
Great. And as we have kind of identified already, this one, oh, sorry,
Oh,
go
sorry.
ahead.
Andrew, is the minor based on one customer, major based on more?
Correct.
The fee for operating the same or less? Because if it's based on complaint and honor system, if I was to open up a home base, I would go to the minor to get the cheapest business license. And then if nobody complains, if I have 2 or 3, until somebody complains, I wouldn't go to a major.
Yeah. I don't know off the top of my head. I think they're the same.
Okay. So if they're the same, why have 2 different identities?
Because in some land uses, they're allowed, and in some they're not. Or sorry, in some districts.
Thank you. But as long as the fees are the same, thank you.
Councillor Billingsley.
No, I just wanted to confirm that the business, like, it doesn't matter if you're minor or major, employ 500 people or employ 1 person, your business license is the same.
That's correct, yeah. Yeah, sorry. And this definition would apply at the development permit stage. So you do need a development permit to operate one of these. And so that fee is the same as well.
Go ahead, Andrew.
Great. Well, I was also going to say, since we've had some discussion, we've identified this is a complex issue. And so this is something that we can deal with more holistically next year when we redo the land use bylaw. So, but I'm glad that we're talking about these now so that we're kind of primed for that. Nice. Non-commercial farm, not used in the land use bylaw. The next bunch here, similar: natural resource development, natural science exhibit, private club, respite support, satellite signal receiving antenna. None of these are actually used in the bylaw, so we don't need to define them. We have story, comma, half, which is redundant because we already have the definition for half story. Obviously, these were carried over and were not consolidated properly. So anyways, we'll keep the half story because it's more accurate. Treed landscape boulevard, also not used. Unenclosed front porch, also not used. And yard, rear. We're just going to change it to rear yard because that is the format that all of the other references to yards would use. So for clarity. Just one definition to add is wall height, because that is used in the land use bylaw. In some districts, there is a different side setback for different wall heights. And so that wall height isn't defined anywhere. And so we've identified that this probably is one that should be defined so that people know exactly how to measure the wall height. and when they're doing blueprints and plans and that kind of thing. So into the section 3 or part 3. So the administrative section, this is where I mentioned that the development authority reference. So right now our bylaw references bylaw 1352-96. So this is actually a requirement of the Municipal Government Act that the development authority be designated by bylaw. So right now we have this standalone bylaw for this, but it is common practice and lots of municipalities do it, where they just consider that the MGA is satisfied if your development authority is designated in the land use bylaw itself. That counts as being in a bylaw, so you don't need a standalone bylaw for it. And so this is just another example where we probably don't need a redundant standalone bylaw. We can minimize the number of extraneous bylaws we have. So let's just put the actual reference into our land use bylaw. So the role that bylaw 1352-96 plays is just brought directly into the land use bylaw. We've copied the exact wording. So essentially the plan would be to keep this reference in here, satisfy the MGA, and then ultimately we could get rid of bylaw 1352-96. Really just procedural stuff. Section 3.8 lists a development that doesn't require a development permit. So we wanted to amend the wording of accessory buildings because this is an issue that came up over the summer with play structures. And so essentially play structures aren't addressed in our land use bylaw at all. And we did have an issue come up with a resident wondering whether their neighbor's play structure needed a permit. We've actually had a few questions like this. And do they need a permit or don't they? And our land use bylaw doesn't say anything about that. And so as we've looked into this, we've looked at other municipalities. Some of them do require permits for it, others don't require permits. And our opinion and our suggestion is that we just add the play structures reference to the exemption here. So a play structure is essentially an accessory building, and lots of them are smaller than this 100 square feet. And the height actually is, so we looked at the typical like play structure kits you can buy from Home Hardware and stuff like that. And a lot of those actually are slightly taller than our minimum height limit in lots of these zones for accessory buildings. And so in this case, we've thought, well, we can't really regulate it that way. Are we going to suddenly require that every play structure in the city needs a permit? In my opinion, that really would fall under just the general expected use of your own yard. And so that's why we just lumped it into the accessory building exemption. So if it's essentially, if you have a play structure, it's less than 100 square feet in area, then you don't need a permit for it, and it is allowed. If it is a gigantic one, bigger than 100 square feet, then it would become a discretionary use and you would need a permit for it. So I hope that's clear. Are there any questions about that?
Councillor Bronco?
So Andrew, how would you designate, because you're going about finished grade, a swimming pool that is a structured portable swimming pool that's bigger than 2 feet there, what you're asking? Do you need a permit for that?
Like an above ground one?
Yeah, but like a temporary, you can buy those Canadian Tire ones. That's gonna
Right.
be bigger than 100 square feet. So if a resident in the summer wanted to put up a portable swimming pool, would he need a permit?
I don't think so, because it's a temporary structure, which I know is can turn into a gray area. But if it's not permanent, I don't think it would need a development permit. We do have regulations for permanent swimming pools, but that would, you're right. There are lots of situations that do become gray areas. So if council would like us to add that to this definition or add another definition or add regulations for it, we can look into that.
Go ahead, Andrew.
Sure. So the second one is construction of an uncovered deck located in the rear yard, which has a height above finished grade and deck floor area not exceeding 20 square meters. And so this is really just the deck floor area section that is unnecessary, really, because in our opinion, if you're building a patio, that's essentially what that's, or sorry, actually the definition of patio is any surface covering in a yard that's less than 0.6 meters above finished grade. So that 0.6 meters is actually the building code differentiator. So if it's taller than that, you need guardrails and that kind of thing, and you need a building permit. So our intent is just to align with that. And it doesn't matter, it shouldn't matter essentially what the square footage of your patio is, as long as drainage is contained and that kind of thing. So just removing that section. And then the next one is the construction of an uncovered porch, which has the height above finished grade of 1 meter, not exceeding 20 square meters. So this is basically a front porch. And so this wording is taken from section 7.3.5 that deals with access platforms. And so we just took it from that section to match. So there are some things that we would like to add to the list of exemptions. So we found that these things that we have been taking permits for essentially probably don't need to be regulated via development permit. And that way it frees up development staff time to be more efficient and dealing with the many other priorities that are probably more important to deal with. So a few things that we would like to add so that they wouldn't need a development permit are patios. So again, that's anything lower than the 0.6 meters, provided that landscaping and site drainage requirements are met and there's no roof. Home offices. So as we talked about major and minor home businesses before, there's actually this third category of home office, for which the regulations state that you're not allowed any on-site visits related to your home office. And so this is another area that we basically have actually no real ability to enforce this. And if there are no visits allowed, then there's essentially theoretically no impact to the community. And so really, this is any home business that doesn't operate on site but has an office there. In administration's opinion, this probably shouldn't require a development permit.
Councillor Hilgard.
Andrew, I know this summer we're going to probably get restaurants and stuff wanting to open up patios because of COVID and provincial allowing it. Where does this regulation fall under then for guidelines for temporary patios for restaurants and stuff?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this is actually, let's table this because I was going to bring it up later close to the end because yes, we have heard from many restaurants they want to do this. And so we have a bit of a plan for that.
Okay, as long as we're going to deal with it on the road here.
Totally.
Good. Thank
Awesome.
you.
Thanks. Oh, and finally, we wouldn't require a permit for fences, walls, or gates that are basically shorter than 6 feet in height, providing that they fit site setbacks and things like that. Applications. So for permitted use permits, the word requires here makes it unclear who is responsible for notifying. So it's really just the wording is weird. So we have just recommended this replacement wording, whereas it's very clear that the development officer will send out a notification to the owner of the site. Just a few changes in the actual districts themselves. So garage suites, we do have garage suites listed in the definitions section, and we do have regulations for them, but they don't appear as allowable uses in any districts. So we have regulations for them, but they're not allowed anywhere. So we are hoping to remedy that. And so we've recommended that they be allowed in these residential districts. These are all, actually, this is all of the residential districts. And add as a discretionary use to, I guess this won't change yours, but the urban service district. So this one, I will maybe highlight that this is one that might, I want to make sure that this is okay. This one could be a bigger discussion, although as far as I know, this, considering that there were regulations drafted and the definition was put in, there was some prior thought to how garage suites should be done in the city. They were just never added to zones. And so just want to make sure that this isn't going to be an issue, because I know that garage suites are one of those that could be more of a contentious thing.
Councillor Nielsen.
Andrew, it doesn't tie directly to garage suites, but what about basement suites? Where are they identified in this document?
Yeah, those are secondary suites. And so we are actually mostly satisfied. I can pull it up in the bylaw here if you want, but it's basically the same idea, where they are allowed in several zones and there are regulations for them. Sorry, here we go. So for example, this is the, see if I can find, oh no. Anyways, I could scroll through, but anyways, does that answer your question? The secondary suites are separate from garage suites, whereas garage suites are in the garage, secondary suites are in the building in the basement. But secondary suites we're pretty satisfied with right now.
But when you indicate that they're discretionary, what does that mean?
Yeah, so that means that they do need to be, so notifications will be sent out to every residence within 76 meters. And so those residents, or actually anybody in this, anybody could appeal it. A permitted use is a use where it's basically a rubber stamp approval if we get a permit for one. And so that is why we've recommended they be discretionary, because they are a little more contentious and there might be places where they actually wouldn't be appropriate. So that we actually have the ability to say, to refuse the permit for it. So the difference.
Sorry, are garage suites and basement suites both discretionary then?
Yes, I believe that secondary suites, yeah, basement suites are discretionary. I can go through and confirm that for you if you'd like.
Okay, and that doesn't have to happen right now. My other question is related to, and it goes back to parking that I think Joe was talking about. When we move from a single dwelling residential district to a narrow lot, single family residential district for adding a garage suite, because it's a narrow lot, does that not create potential parking problems?
It may, yeah. And so that's why we set it as discretionary, so that if there is an application for one on a site that is too narrow for the parking, then we do have the ability to refuse the permit on that basis.
And is there any, as we draft this, or as you draft this, is there any reason why you wouldn't eliminate certain things? Like, so for example, if I said, I would like to see the narrow lot, single-family residential district be excluded from this list for either a garage suite or a basement suite. Is this the time to have that conversation, or just put it forward as a suggestion?
Yeah, right now, yeah, I'm open to your suggestions. And if your direction is that we remove that narrow lot option from this list, then I'll take it out. And then when I do bring the bylaw to council, it won't include that narrow lot.
So I would like to see that come from the narrow lot, single-family residential district, but I'm one of 7 at the table, so.
Sure. So
Mine might be the only voice here saying no.
Councilor Billingsley, did you have something?
Nope, I'm good.
Councilor Bronco?
To my colleague Wayne, so what if you have I'd rather not remove it from a short or small lot and put that, in order to have that, you need space for 2 parking. Because then, let's say down the road, you have a senior who has a house but needs some income, but she don't drive. There is parking space for that basement suite or garage suite. So to say, just to put a residential small lot that you can't have that, I rather just, we put a parking limit that you got to be within your property, have so much parking space for that bottom suite. Because if somebody who owns the house doesn't have a driver's license, doesn't have a car, but she wants to have some affordable money, she can do that, or he or she.
For sure. So, yeah, parking is one of the big issues when we talk about garage suites. It seems to be one of the big hurdles to get over, and so this is, I guess, the issue of parking is something that I definitely want to tackle when we redo the land use bylaw. Other municipalities have taken some, I guess, fairly drastic steps. There are some municipalities, Edmonton is one of them, that has completely gotten rid of all parking regulations. So they've said it's up to the developer to know, because really, reasonably, a developer isn't going to build something that is not going to have parking, because they're interested in having parking for their tenants, residents, or customers too. So anyways, our current bylaw says that when you do develop a garage suite or a secondary suite, you have to have at least one parking space for it. So when you do build one of these additional suites, there is regulations that say you need to have the parking on site. So that's how it works right now. It's something
I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that then, if it's already been accounted for in the
yeah. Okay.
conditions.
Sounds good. I think I'll just clarify and ask for specific direction on the narrow lot. Should we remove that from this one?
No. not
No,
this time.
I'm okay leading it
I see.
based
Okay.
on your response. I'm good with
I see.
the fact that they've already identified it has a caveat for parking.
Yeah, sounds good. Okay, great. The only other use to change is just the minor impact utility service. This isn't listed as allowable in any zone, and I think that the intent is that it should be in the urban service district. So it's another one that's just kind of left hanging. It's not allowed anywhere, so we should make it allowed somewhere, because it is an important use to have out there. Specific zones. So in the R1A, the small lots dwelling residential district, there is this minimum side yard setback that is 0.9. So it's just slightly different than all of the other residential uses. So we just want to bring it consistent and make it 1 meter instead of 0.9. So here we go. Great. Parking and loading. So there are some issues with our current parking regulations. First of all, this is more of just an idea and a heads up. Many municipalities actually have diagrams that show parking dimensions. This is parking space dimensions. So if it's off the top of my head, how big are our parking spaces? 5 meters long, I think, by 2.7 or something wide. Diagrams are great and they're helpful. So we're going to do up some of those and put them in.
Councillor Bronco?
Andrew, just a question on parking. It seems to be,
Yep.
keeps coming up.
For sure. It always does.
How do we deal with, if we go to a single dwelling in a small lot, and let's say the resident moves in and he's got 4 kids, and they all have cars, and we know we can only put 2 up. Are we in the position to control that or not? Because if those 4 vehicles are paid license fees and they're allowed to park on public roads, how do we do that? Because then that little house dwelling can only maybe take 2 cars, but the residents have 4, and they're probably parking in some place where the other residents could use it.
Yeah.
We can't control that, can we?
We can't. And if I had an answer for this question, I would write a book about it for sure. This is one of the big questions that the planning world is trying to deal with. As demographics change, as infill is densifying communities, as families are, living longer under one roof, you've got, whole family could have 6 people and each of them has a car. So how do we allocate space for that properly? So as I mentioned, Edmonton actually just got rid of parking rules and said, ultimately, street parking will capture ideally enough of the parking that is necessary, and then people will probably have a driveway or that kind of thing because it will be basically demanded by the market. So yeah, that's a great question. You're right that we don't have the ability to regulate based on, well, you're building a house and you're a family of 6, you need 6 parking stalls. That's not how these regulations work. So, and when they move out and demographics change again, then what do we do? So this is something that, short answer is, we're going to do a lot more research into this and see if we can figure out a Wetaskiwin specific solution for when we redo the land use bylaw.
Councillor Billingsley?
Thank you. I would like to have that discussion coming forward about having the market decide on parking as well.
Yeah.
It's been kind of a pet peeve of mine. Also then with the downtown of what they pay for that $1,000 for their in lieu of parking, which that money has just been sitting in a bank account and actually not doing anything with. So I would like, when this comes forward, to have that discussion.
Sounds great. So this is actually, I threw it in here thinking maybe council's feeling bold today, but seems like Councillor Billingsley might be. So option 1 is we could delete Schedule 1 that outlines all of our requirements for parking. So there is that. Alternatively, we can keep this schedule. Actually, I'll put it up on the screen here. I didn't put it in the table because it's pretty long. But this actually is an issue. And as Councillor Billingsley identified, the cash in lieu for parking is a pretty outdated system. And I agree that it actually probably is a hindrance to development. And so there's that. Also, the actual number of parking spaces we require is quite extreme. Sorry, I'm looking for 7.4. So it's something that we do want to address. It's probably something we should address separately than this specific bunch of amendments, which is why I didn't try to tackle it right now. Because yeah, it is a large issue that could have broader impacts. And so the one specific issue that I am bringing forward right now is to just point out that the schedule is not actually complete because there is not a requirement for single detached. It has all of the residential types have a requirement. So apartments, need 1 parking space per bachelor suite, and 1.5 for every 2-bedroom dwelling. And so that's how we try and deal with it right now. The issue is that single detached houses aren't on this list anywhere. So that has caused a bit of an issue as we issuing permits have not been clear on what to require for parking. So our recommendation is just to make the same as duplex housing, so 2 parking spaces per dwelling unit, which could include 1 garage space, which is fairly reasonable, I think, and would accommodate the average parking needs of a single detached house. So that's option 2, is just to add a list here requiring, or I guess we would add it to this list probably for the 2 parking spaces. The other aspect of it is for commercial uses, 4 parking spaces per 100 square meters is way too many. I was going to compile a list. We didn't have time to compile a list of how many variances we have approved, but on many permits over the last year for commercial uses, we have granted a variance for this parking requirement because it's not feasible for them to provide this many. In a quick look at similar municipalities like City of Beaumont, I believe was half this. They didn't do it per 100 square meters, I believe, but it worked out to being about 2 parking spaces. Some of them are even a quarter of what we require. And so this is something that we should look at as its own standalone issue. So as Councillor Billingsley identified, I can certainly take a look at this and bring it back. So I guess my request for direction there is that something we should tackle for this summer, or should we wait until we redo the entire bylaw? And this summer we can just continue issuing permits with variances.
Mayor Gander.
Has it been difficult to issue permits with variances? Is it something we should address for the summer, or should we do it overall?
It's not particularly an issue, but it does mean that where a use would have otherwise been permitted, since we need to add that variance, it becomes a discretionary use. And so we do have to send out notifications, and there is the 21-day waiting period, and there is the risk that the permit could then be appealed by anybody in town. So it just adds a little bit of risk and a little more paperwork and mailing costs. So,
but if we just decided today to remove that or decrease it, cut it in half or quarter it.
For sure. Yep. I would suggest that we not pick a specific, like not say quarter it quite yet. I would suggest that we take a little time to look at, just to make sure that we're not causing other issues with other aspects, and just to make sure the regulations actually jive properly. So yeah, I think my suggestion would be that council direct the development department to take a look at this and bring it back in the future. We can do it for this summer for sure.
We can do that in council meeting then, if we're going to give direction to administration.
Yeah.
Through motion.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Sounds good.
Great. Okay. Sounds good. So I think that's guidance enough. And I think for this moment, I will just add this amendment where we add the regulation for a single detached. Great. Next bit is the loading spaces section. This also obviously is an incomplete table because there is a regulation here for buildings less than 465 square meters. And I think that the intent was that there be a different regulation for these ones. And so actually the recommendation here is just to say if it's less than 465, let's give them 2 loading spaces instead of the 4. And if it is larger than that, let's say 3 minimum. I think that this specifically will have, I'm okay with setting hard numbers right now for this because I think this has a lot less chance of causing issues to many developments across town because it's just loading spaces, and it's very likely commercial developments and industrial developments have a lot more incentive to actually give themselves more loading spaces if they need it. So that's why I'm comfortable setting these hard numbers for this section. And if there are any questions or issues with that, please speak now.
Go ahead, Andrew.
Sounds good. Minor home-based businesses. So these are the clauses that were in the definition, those regulatory clauses that we removed, and we'll just put them in the regulations section. Signs. So I know that signs are a hot topic around here. There's a few critical changes that we've actually encountered that have been issues as we're developing, as we're issuing permits. Quick one here is just we identified construction site identification sign. These are permitted in every district, which means it would just be a rubber stamp permit. So essentially that means they're allowed everywhere. So do we really need to make people get a permit for it? Probably not. And considering they are for safety and they're not advertising or anything, let's not require a permit for them. The only significant changes that we wanted to make to zoning rule or to sign rules are, so we're suggesting that an A board sign, so that's like a sandwich sign, be added to the RMX district, which is residential mixed use, which is residential and allows for some light industrial uses. It seems fair that temporary sandwich signs should be allowed in those areas, as well as being discretionary in the urban services and urban reserve uses or districts, sorry. The primary issue that we encountered this summer with signs is that in the urban service district, there are quite a few uses. I'll just pull that up here actually, that it would be reasonable to have certain types of signs. For example, there are things like, this is the urban service district, which allows health services, public library, religious assembly. So there are actually some urban service districts with churches on them, which means it's probably okay for them to have a freestanding sign. Most of these uses, it probably would be reasonable that there would be a sign to go along with them. But in the current regulations, freestanding signs aren't allowed there. So in the urban service district, we just kind of went through and looked at what signs would probably be allowed to go with those uses normally. So awning signs, banner signs, and fascia signs, portable signs, roof signs, and wall signs. We identified as ones that we should add. Same with the urban reserve. There are also some types of signs that are referred to. So in these residential districts, R3, R4, and R5, the electronic message sign should be discretionary because of the allowance for major home-based businesses, which actually in the regulations of the business section itself does allow for these signs. So there's just a contradiction there in the bylaw. So we thought it needs to be added here so that we know that it's allowed. Any others? Oh, and window signs. So window signs should be added to all the residential districts because there are references to window signs being allowed within the home-based business regulations. And I believe that is the flashing signs also. Those are no different in their use than, for example, electronic message signs. You know, if an electronic message sign is allowed, then why would a flashing sign not be allowed? And these are the commercial districts. And again, they are discretionary. So if there is a legitimate reason that they would be a nuisance, then we can refuse that permit. And projecting signs, this was also in the RMX district, which does seem reasonable if someone has a business there. A projecting sign is a sign that is basically hanging off of the side of a building. And that seems like a reasonable use there, not intrusive to the neighbors or anything. So are there any questions? Sorry, that was a whirlwind tour of the use tables for signs. Are there any questions about this?
Go ahead, Andrew.
Great. Specific use regulations. This is just the garage suite regulations that we took out of the definition and put them in the regulations. And finally, so in the maps section, this is actually, so currently we did add some printed, kind of like printed version of the map to the land use bylaw. When I arrived, that didn't exist, and I think it should, because essentially that is the go-to, that is the standard document that we go to for zoning. When I arrived, we only had the web map, but I think we do need that hard copy of the maps. And so as we were producing those maps, we realized there is actually this zone called the TSC zone, the Transportation Utility Service Corridor Zone. And these properties are zoned that way, but this district doesn't appear in the land use bylaw. And so our recommendation is just that those be basically converted to the urban service zone. It seems like that was an oversight probably as bylaws were updated. And I'm not sure if it was a mapping error, but I couldn't find any history on it. So I'm going to default to the assumption that they used to be zoned that way and it was never changed. So let's just change it in the appropriate way and actually add it to this bylaw amendment. And then finally, just another review of these are non-substantial amendments that we're going through as we are updating it. So for example, changing pronouns, there are a lot of references to the development officer will make his decision. And so just changing that with an eye to council's goal of equity and diversity, changing that to non-gender specific pronouns. Changing references to the 88 bylaw. Some of the references in the bylaw still say, look at this section in 1988, but that was repealed and replaced by this bylaw. So we're going to change that. Some references to acts that no longer exist. So the Traffic Safety Act is actually now the Highway, what is it called? Highways Protection Safety Act, maybe something like that, but it's not Traffic Safety Act. So we're going to update that. And then adding a little bit to reflect our electronic advertising approach now. And there are some typos and misnumbered lists and things like that. So the administrative amendments that are non-substantial. So thank you for your time going through this. Seems like actually we'll bring all of these forward as proposed here. So our plan is to have this amendment bylaw done for next council meeting. So we'll bring it to April 26th, regular council for first reading.
Councilor
Any
Nielsen.
final questions?
Yes, I'm coming back to chart 7.6.6.1, the sign, the grid there.
Yep.
So we have 33 different kinds of signs. And I don't know how many different zone classifications.
Yeah.
And I know that when we, a year or so ago, were dealing with signage in our community and where what could go and all the rest of it, it became pretty evident through the process, again, it's one more thing where we don't have the manpower that's going to sort of oversee and ensure and manage this kind of thing. I guess I'm wondering, is there a way that this thing can be collapsed into a, I don't know, a more, I don't know, more meaningful, less.
Yeah, less bulky. Yeah.
Yeah, like to me, this is just really, I mean, I understand what we're trying to do here, but in actual fact, if we can't manage it, why are we doing it? And to sort of have it this clunky is
Certainly.
awkward. So I guess, is there any way we can condense this to make it more user-friendly? I mean, the chart itself is user-friendly, but the number of signs and the ability for our enforcement people to actually wrestle with this a little bit better.
For sure. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. And that is something that we are planning to tackle it when we redo the land use bylaw, because that's another one that it will require quite a bit of focus just to make sure that we're capturing everything we need to without excluding the things that we shouldn't exclude. And so you're absolutely right. It is bulkier than I would like right now. It could be much more efficient for development officers to do their jobs and for the public to be able to interpret on their own. So yes, that is something that we are planning to address next year with the land use bylaw update. Again, if that's something that you think we should set a higher priority on, we can do that this year. But we have kind of set it to be the next step in resolving these things. Yeah, ultimately my goal is to reduce the number of sign definitions because they don't need to be that many. And ultimately also to reduce the number of actual zones we have, because we actually don't need as many zones as we have either. And you're right, it's confusing and bulky and clunky.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you very much.
All right, we will move on to item 3C, Airport Authority update and discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Council. So the purpose with this one is to just provide an update to Council on the progress related to the development of the terms of reference in the bylaw for establishment of a nonprofit / airport authority for governance, operation, and maintenance of the Wetaskiwin Regional Airport, and sort of get a confirmation on direction before we proceed with larger public consultation. So as for the report, November 23rd, 2020 council meeting, council passed motion 482/20, moved by Councillor Dean Billingsley, moved to direct administration to work with community stakeholders to establish terms of reference for a nonprofit / airport authority responsible for governance and operational oversight of the airport, review legal requirements associated with the establishment of a nonprofit airport authority, and prepare a bylaw consistent with the terms of reference and relevant legislation no later than Q2 of 2021. So again, just going to kind of go through where we've been and what we've done since. So met 3 times with a working group that was consisted largely of airport users and stakeholders that Brett Binney was familiar with. So there is actually a full list of the user group included in the minutes for the meetings that were attached as attachments 3 to 5. We had 3 meetings. Over the course of those 3 meetings, we came to some broad consensus on what a terms of reference would look like and a bylaw. So the group did feel that it would need to be called an airport authority, even though it wouldn't meet the requirements of the Regional Airport Authorities Act, which is the provincial legislation of authorities, and shouldn't actually be subject to that because it imposes a number of additional requirements, audited financial statements, separate board requirements, etc. So we've come up with the terms of reference. I'm going to go over some of the highlights of the terms of reference. This is attachment 1. And we'll kind of come back from there. So as it relates to terms of reference, role of the authority is established in accordance with whatever city bylaw we come up with to manage and operate the Wetaskiwin Regional Airport in a safe, secure, and efficient manner, and to advance the economic and community development by means that include promoting and encouraging improved air transportation and an expanded aviation industry for the general benefit of the public in the region. As for responsibilities of the authority, the idea again would be, since it's a nonprofit, they will take over all of these items listed here, which include cost-effective management and operation. Procurement activities are consistent with the city's procurement policies, maintaining airport infrastructure and facilities, complying with Transport Canada regulations, recommend to council applications for grant funding, any improvements that are required, encourage development of the airport and maximize the use of the facilities. Come to council by the end of October each year with a capital improvement plan and also a budget. Develop reasonable agreements for the use of city resources, and then come to council and report when required. In addition, there's sort of 3 areas that provided that they're consistent with the MGA, any municipal bylaws and Transport Canada regulations, then the authority would be able to enact legislation or rules governing the daily administration and operations of the airport, daily maintenance of the airport, including all facilities, and establishment of the operating policies and guidelines. Broad ideas on membership here. I'll just touch on these quickly. So we sort of came up with 8 members of a board, 1 being a member of council, 1 being a member of city administration that would be a voting member, and then 6 at-large citizens from Wetaskiwin or surrounding area. Generally speaking, those 6 at-large members would consist of 2 airport business owners, 1 hangar owner, 1 airport resident, 1 representative from the flying club, and then 1 other at-large member from some other area. So this could be a technical expert or perhaps someone associated with the Reynolds Museum, etc. I'll go just kind of touch on decision making, section 7. So it would be 50 plus 1, and if it didn't meet the 50 plus 1, if you ended in a tie, it would not pass. Responsibilities of councils that are currently contemplated would be approving an annual operating budget, approving capital improvements and major repairs through budget allocations, supporting efforts of the Wetaskiwin Regional Airport Authority to make airport improvements, including making grant applications where appropriate, and supplying city resources in accordance with any agreements that were reached with the authority. So there's a bylaw that's there that's consistent with this terms of reference. I don't think I need to go through those pieces. Again, there's also the minutes. There's a summary document which does kind of talk to some of the options that council may want to explore. These would be options that are going to be presented, or at least are contemplated to be presented for our larger public engagement sessions. The larger public engagement session would largely consist of a direct mail piece followed up with an open house. There'd be a survey with a Q&A, questions and answers section, some social media and press releases, and then ultimately a public hearing on the matter, so that anyone who did want to express their concerns directly to council could do so. And that's sort of where we're at. So I guess at this point, I'll just open it up to council for any other additional questions.
Councillor Nielsen.
Thank you. Thanks for the report, Jason. Could I go to responsibility of the authority, item number 3F? I'm wondering, recommended council any extension or improvement. Is an extension not an improvement?
It is. I think, sorry, through the chair to Councilor Nielsen, it is. I think the intent is more around extensions being lengthening of the runway, and improvements being anything else. So I know that in the past there's been consideration to lengthen the runway so that different types of aircraft could be accommodated at the airport. But in all fairness, you're absolutely correct. It could be removed and just made an improvement. That's fair.
For me personally, I'd like to see extension taken out and just simply left as improvement.
Sure.
To me, the item of extension, it concerns me that it may sort of bind us or tie us a little bit to that kind of a conversation. But so that's just my comment. Moving down to just below item K in the same section, the authority may make rules. Was there a reason why we've included a double negative in that statement as opposed to simply saying make rules consistent with the Municipal Government Act? Like, was that intended specifically for any reason?
Through the chair to Councilor Nielsen. So the MGA has a lot of vagueness in it, right? Intentionally, so that basically you can make rules provided the province hasn't made rules on them already, right? So it was actually intentional to put not inconsistent in there because if we've made if we've come up with a bylaw municipally that covers an area and or the MGA is mute on something, then it would be fair, or sorry, if we don't have a bylaw and the MGA is mute, then it would be fair for them to make a rule associated with it.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure that it was intended. And then my last question, Jason, relates to the conversation and I guess the conversation regarding the accountable executive. So what exactly is the accountable executive? And then there's a statement further on in part of your some of the previous conversations or meetings. The expectation was that the accountable executive would not be a city employee. So first off, what is an accountable executive? Why would it not be a city employee? And I'm assuming there's a financial cost to having a accountable executive.
Through the chair to Councilor Nielsen. So the accountable executive piece is actually a pretty significant one as it relates to risk in my mind. Right now I'm the accountable executive for the airport. The accountable executive is tasked with and responsible for the safe operation of the airport in accordance with its operations manual. And the accountable executive must be able to mobilize resources as required to ensure that safe operation is paramount effectively, right? So as it relates to the accountable executive position, if an airport authority is taking over the operations and management of the airport, then that role, that title, which is it's designated with Transport Canada for our airport. So I'm on record with Transport Canada as the accountable executive for this airport. If an airport authority does come to fruition, then it is reasonable, since it would be the airport authority who's tasked with controlling the finances and bringing resources to bear. It is their responsibility to have an accountable executive associated with that, and that would not be a city employee then in that role. And that should, in theory, put the risk where it should be, which is with the people who are accountable for the operations. Does that sufficiently answer your question, Councillor Nielsen?
Maybe. I'll leave it there for now. I may come back at it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councillor Billingsley.
Thank you. Jason, through the chair. So you had said that this is actually non-authority, but then why do they want to, or why is it called that? And how would that then differ from the standing committee option? And I'll leave it at that. There's going to lead to another question after, but if you could answer that.
Through the chair to Councillor Billingsley. So it would not be an authority under the terms of the provincial regulations. It does not have to be. So the key difference would be petitioning the Minister of Transportation to actually make it its own separate entity under the provincial legislation, which is what you have for Edmonton airports and Calgary. Fort McMurray's is also an airport authority. I believe Red Deer has also gone down that path. In terms of a difference between a committee and or a commission, so there was previously a commission for where there was county representation, city representation, and then some stakeholder representation on the commission. In this case, we wouldn't need a commission in any way because this is all city-owned infrastructure. As it relates to a committee, it's effectively working that way. We would just have a nonprofit that's operating it, and they would be tasked with setting up all the contracts. I don't see this as being significantly different than an FCSS or a library board, for that matter. I think that we're just, in terms of calling it an authority, it was one of the pieces that the working group felt was important because that's sort of consistent with airport terminology in terms of who's running and operating the airport.
So then this document that was brought forward, how does that differ from the last airport authority agreement that was, I guess, maybe close to 10 years ago? Is it similar?
Through the Charter Council, Neil, sorry, Billingsley, sorry. We started there. We started with the previous bylaw. And we sort of went through everything and said what worked and what didn't. So we tweaked a few things. I think that the representation on the board is a little more diverse and does allow for more input from different shareholder groups. It does still allow the city to retain control. So that, as I understand it, and I wasn't part of those discussions, but as I understand it, one of the larger reasons or one of the key considerations in repealing the previous authority bylaw was that there was some concerns about control from the city as related to having an airport authority, running the city's infrastructure. And so through this, there's still representation from council and from city administration, but there's a few other key pieces that would be sort of ultimate control mechanisms for council. The intent is, of course, for the city to retain ownership of the airport, but there would be a lease agreement. So the city would have some levers and mechanisms associated with the lease agreement. And then, of course, there's also the funding agreement, which is part of the presentation for council. So in essence, the authority would need to come forward every year to say, this is how much money we're asking for. And then council would say yay or nay based on the presentation that the authority has made to council. So we did start there. We started with the old bylaw as it was presented, and we again kind of just tweaked a few things. So I think it still addresses the concerns of having people who know about airport business being part of the group that's making decisions about airport business, while still having ultimate control and the infrastructure retained by the city. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think
Councilor?
so. If you scroll back up, Karen, to 5, no, 4. Yes. I'm wondering, my concern is that we only have 1 or 2 votes, I guess, including the city manager sitting on that position of the 8. And does that then, does the city then lose control of what's going on there? I mean, we are, I've got concerns that we no longer have as much say, and I guess maybe that's what happens when it goes to an authority. But I've got a little bit of reservation on that it's only 2 of the 8 votes. And I'm also wondering, like it says here, where was it? Has to do with, I'm wondering, should these people be landowners or users of the air or residents of Wetaskiwin? is that matter?
Through the chair to Councillor Billingsley. So I think that, in some ways it does matter. I think it's important to have those types of voices on the board of an authority. But I think there's other opportunities as well, right? So as an example, the president, outgoing, as I understand it, of the Flying Club is not actually a Wetaskiwin resident, right? But he's still an important stakeholder. I think there's also opportunities for perhaps a Dean Irvin, who's a director with Edmonton Airports Authority, who actually indicated that he would be willing to sit on our authority board if there was one instituted, to participate as well. So I think there's, as it relates to having voices at the table, the city would have a voice at the table, both from a council, so one voice from council and one voice from city administration at every meeting, provided everybody showed up, right? So that's a good sign, and I think that that's important. And the working group, when I was working through all these issues with them, actually did agree and felt very strongly that it was important that the city was part of these meetings and part of the board, and that they were able to talk through things as related to city needs and city requirements, and different elements that may come up that could impact the city as literally the owner of the infrastructure, but also economic development pieces and planning and zoning regulations and all those pieces. To be able to have those voices at the table was very important for the group. So I think that council is there, as one member of council is there. I think that administration's there because the city manager or the city manager's designate is there at the table. And then you still have those other levers that you need or can pull if you need to, as it relates to the lease agreement and of course the funding agreement, which would probably have a clause somewhere in the vicinity of unfettered discretion, right? So something to that nature. So if things were falling off the rails, then it would be, wait a minute, let's get back on rails, or we're going to not give you any more money for the rest of the year, or something to that effect, right?
And finally, then we've got, as far as calling it an authority, but then we had three other options, whether it's a commission, standing committee, business as usual, or sell it. The commission standing committees would be different than what we have now. And was that investigated at all, or was that the whole direction was to go with an airport authority?
Through the chair to Councillor Billingsley, so the motion as it was passed was to explore an authority. So that's what we've done. Now, I will say that there were preliminary discussions around what a commission might look like. And in my mind, the key difference, a commission or a committee, so previously it was called a commission. It wouldn't actually probably be a commission under the MGA. It would probably still be a committee if you were to move forward with that. But the key consideration and the difference there as relates to the working group was that if we're making decisions together as a working group, it would be important in their mind to still have the ability and the control over exercising and delivering on those decisions. And that's where the difference between the authority versus a committee would ultimately lie, I should say. So if you were to keep it as a committee, and there's nothing wrong with that, and have a number of outside stakeholders that were now engaged in and part of the process of airport development and airport business, I think that's a benefit. Overall, I think that the responsibility would still lay with the city as it relates to that accountable executive position. And it would be up to the city to deliver those services and make sure that the airport is run safely. So does that answer your question, Councillor Billingsley?
Yeah, I think so. Like you said, direction was given for an airport authority, and I get that.
No, sorry to interrupt. I should say there was additional as it relates to the other options that were presented. I mean, the other one is just a base case, right? Where we're just running the authority, we're just running the airport. And then selling it was also discussed with the working group, but generally was considered as a less desirable option, as if you actually transfer the infrastructure over, you end up ineligible for STIP grant funding from the province for some of these larger pieces of infrastructure capital projects, right?
Anybody else? Seeing none, thank you, Jason. You're good.
I'm
Mr.
gonna
Jones?
get, well, I'm gonna say you're probably looking for direction of to either carry forward with this, go in a different direction, or abandon it. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, if you're accepting for information, then we're just going to proceed forward with the larger community consultation process as it relates to the airport user group, and sort of getting some of that feedback and bringing it forward and back to council so that you can ultimately make a decision. And keeping in mind, this would just be the next step, right? So if you were to pass the bylaw, I would expect a transitional period where the authority would be established and they would start working on some bylaws, and they'd have to work on their first budget, and that budget would have to come back in front of you in November or whenever. But so that, you know, I would expect that the city's still operating the airport, but all those discussions about how to transition from one to the other, those would be happening sort of after the bylaws passed, but before the transition period has taken effect. So I think if you're accepting for information, I think we know where we're going, which is just keep down the path that we're on, which is not necessarily saying we're on an airport authority, but just engaging in the public consultation piece, and then bringing that back in front of you so that you can all collectively make a decision on what's the right path forward for the airport.
Perfect. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you.
We will now adjourn, take a little bit of a break before 4 o'clock meeting.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.